The slimy tentacles of monetization has made it into the gaming industry and melded so well over time into the culture that they are just considered part of gaming at this time. It's been a slow burn, but over the past 15 to 20 years, the industry has been turning up the heat with strategies and tactics that some of you might be well aware of, but I will attempt to shed further light onto the subject. Publishers and developers are increasingly under pressure from their investors to milk their players for every possible cent they can get their hands on, as it allows developers to generate revenue beyond the initial sale of the game. And they are using every possible tactics, ethics be damned. There has been some well-earned controversy surrounding certain monetization practices. Loot boxes come to mind, which are basically gambling in another form. And some traction for regulating this practice has started, but already there are workarounds to loot box regulations, for example Diablo Immortal, where they don't have loot boxes, but rather rift bosses. Unfortunately, the rabbit hole goes much deeper than this. First, allow me to play devil's advocate for a moment.
Come on, get in there, go!
You know what? No, I won't. Sure, it's a capitalistic system and they need to make money, but this is beyond just generating a profit. It's exploitative and predatory, preying on and manipulating the primal drives of their customers, usually targeting the already vulnerable demographics of children and addicts, with well-researched and implemented psychological tactics. Given the increased accessibility of games, the platforms where these predatory tactics are implemented are exponentially growing. Whether it was intentional or not, the infestation of these systems happens slowly, with the gradual and subtle manipulations of people's attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors through small and incremental changes that were not immediately noticeable. This is a technique known as boiling the frog. Who would have thought that a late 90s expansion pack from Blizzard or a cosmetic horse armor from Bethesda in the early 2000s would pave the way for an era of games as a service and the microtransaction hellscape of today? There are plenty of monetization models available for publishers to play with and combine, but I'll be boiling down the different types of monetization of video games in a progressively worsening pattern. First off, the pre-order, early access, special, and retailer edition models. I've made a video about that already. Check it out as I've already did a deep dive into that. This allows a developer to get money for their game before it's even officially released, giving the player no clear recourse if the game fails to meet expectations, as typically it's too late for refunds and the developer has already made its profit. Then comes the DLC model. This is a typical and accepted part of video games now. Games are almost always expected to have DLC or expansions. And now that gamers expect this, and you know what? More content for my favorite game is good, right? Developers are leveraging that to their favor and designing around this expectation. And expectations of DLC has had a ripple effect that made it normalized for games to release clearly unfinished, with missing story elements and features always promised in future DLCs. Then comes the subscription model, or games as a service, which has also been around for a long time, and is an accepted part of many games, as with any other form of subscription-based entertainment, with the simple concept being developer keeps pumping out content at regular intervals, and we as players pay for access to said content. And if we stop paying, we lose that access, or miss out on these limited time events and exclusive items, and other time-gated content that can create a sense of urgency and pressure to stay subscribed or resubscribe over and over again before it's too late. It is of course a good steady income for the developers and content being produced, but they have to keep you hooked so you keep playing, and the concept of FOMO, or fear of missing out, is leveraged hard to encourage players to stay subscribed for longer periods. You must be thinking, all the arguments presented so far don't seem that unethical, maybe a bit slimy, but unethical? There are plenty of free games out there that don't even cost me a thing, and I would tell you that this is just the tip of the iceberg and that we're gonna Titanic right into them right now. And the biggest iceberg of all, microtransactions. From in-game cosmetics to pay-to-earn systems, microtransactions have been identified as the biggest money generator for the publisher and investor, slowly bleeding the consumer of every cent they can. And they will employ every tactic in the book to finesse the player into doing exactly what they want, to the extent that they can afford to have their games free to play. Free to play, or free to suffer. While free-to-play games tout being able to enjoy and earn everything in their games without paying, they fail to mention that you'll be primarily paying with your time, spending it as fodder to the whales who pay, and who are actually subsidizing your playtime. The designers of these games will mention that everything in the game is optional, and paying for a subscription or boost is merely pay for convenience or time saving, and everything in the game is available to you for free as long as you earn it. What they will not tell you is that the game is designed with manufactured barriers in place, like limited inventory, energy and stamina system, or reduced experience rates, to make you suffer unless you pay to remove these barriers, rather than pay to gain boosts. There is a great video of a monetization seminar linked below that will prove how deviously manipulative and unethical the game developers knowingly farm their players for money. Watch it if you dare. I'll try to skim the surface of this cesspool of design and summarize the main points. And their main goal is to get you into a paying mindset. The tactic of boiling the frog can be effective here because it allows game developers to gradually introduce monetization strategies without triggering player resistance or backlash. By making small and incremental changes over time, players may not notice or feel the impact of these changes, and in fact, some will welcome them until it's too late. This tactic typically backfires eventually, as it can lead to player frustration and resentment if they eventually realize that the game they enjoyed so much has become excessively monetized, but by then it's too late. First, by establishing a reward system such as a daily, weekly, and monthly login bonus, achievements for basic activities in the game, and the occasional premium reward, these systems are designed to trigger the brain's pleasure centers and train and reinforce behavior. Developers are then able to lead players to continue playing, increasing the chances of them spending money by spending more time in the game with hopes of earning more rewards. Games often incorporate social features such as leaderboards, rankings, item levels, and ratings, which can create a sense of obligation and pressure to keep up with other players, which in turn can lead to a need and desire to find ways to get an edge, usually by purchasing items or upgrades in order to keep up with the competition. And this fuels the urge of the wallet warrior to continue and pay to win. And although there are transactions that don't affect gameplay at all, such as cosmetics, they still allow developers and publishers to normalize in-game purchasing and microtransactions that lead to thinking, why not spend a bit more money to get a little further ahead? Once that first purchase is made, psychological principles and cognitive bias trickery, such as loss aversion and sunk cost fallacy, kick into high gear, encouraging players to spend more money. The sunk cost fallacy is a tendency to continue investing in a project or activity because of the resources already invested, regardless of whether or not it makes sense to do so. Loss aversion is a tendency to prefer avoiding losses to acquiring gains. By creating a sense of investment in the game and presenting purchases as a way to avoid losing progress or missing out on rewards, developers can encourage players to spending more money. Game developers continue to use the concept of FOMO to encourage players to spend money right away and right now. Limited time events, exclusive items, and other gated content can create a sense of urgency and pressure to purchase before it's too late, all boosted with a sense of false scarcity and fake sales arbitrarily put in place by the developer. The biggest tactic, however, which encompasses and enables all of the above in one way or another, is the obfuscation of the actual costs. It is the intentional act of making something difficult to understand or unclear, and in the context of video games, it refers to making the currency system involved confusing and overly complicated for players. The use of multiple in-game currencies can make it difficult for players to understand the actual real money value of different items or upgrades, which can lead to confusion and frustration. Game developers use obfuscation to intentionally create this confusion, with the goal of having players brush over the complexity and to just spend more money on in-game purchases. For example, on top of the typical in-game currencies such as gold and copper, a game may have a premium currency that can only be obtained by spending real money, but you can also get a basic currency that can be earned through gameplay actions, a battle pass currency earned by completing battle pass tasks, event currency that can only be earned at specific times of the year, and other currency required to upgrade gear, and another currency to buy cosmetics, each typically being interchangeable with one another with exchange costs. But then, they would make it difficult for players to understand the different exchange rates between these different currencies, as they would allow players to exchange one type of currency for another, but the exchange rate may be intentionally unclear, have strange values, fluctuate over time, have sales, see skim pricing, or even require an additional tertiary currency to pay for the actual exchange. This of course makes it difficult for players to understand the true real money value of their in-game purchases, and may lead to them spending even more money in order to acquire the currency they need. Combined with the fact that the actual packages of these currencies that you can purchase with real money from the in-game store, which are typically strategically priced to entice you, but also give you just less than enough currency requiring you to overpurchase to afford the flavor of the month FOMO thing, with requirements set arbitrarily by the developer. All these monetization tactics affect game design at a fundamental level, where games are being designed to be monetized rather than be fun, engaging, or entertaining. The pursuit of revenue and revenue alone now shows its influence in many aspects of the development of video games. From pre-ordering to paid betas and early access, releasing as fast as possible to meet quarterly goals, day one DLC and microtransactions to continue the income and revenue stream on games that are intentionally made incomplete to sell them, all wrapped up in buzzwords like live systems or games as a service. If after deep consideration, and if you think your favorite game doesn't suffer from the above, then I encourage you to share it in the comments below and let people know, as there are fewer and fewer game designers and publishers who are more interested in making good, entertaining games than making money. Overall, the psychological tactics used in video games to monetize them are based on manipulating and abusing principles of motivation, reward, social influence, and cognitive bias. By understanding how these tactics game developers use, it can make you a more aware gamer. I hope this video sheds some light on the slimy tactics being used by game developers, publishers, and the pressures being put on them by their investors, and thus will lead you to make proper decisions in game purchases in the future. Thank you for watching. Consider checking out more videos, subscribing for future videos, following me on Twitch for live streams, and always make time for games.